Jerome Powell, Trump and Jerome has been having a tumultuous relationship since the beginning of time. All right. So I want to get to the money. Trump is saying that this guy's removal can't come fast enough because he wants interest rates down and it's already too late. So let's go ahead and dig into this story. Make sure y'all hit a like for the algorithm, subscribe to the channel, and turn on your notifications. I'm going to give you the short version and I'm going to give you the long version. I wonder if I should give y'all the long version first. Let's go with this one. Let's get into this one and let's deep dive into it and let's see what's happening.
We do have breaking news this morning. I gotta say, it's breaking news that made the market sit up straight. President Trump, just a short time ago, declared on social media that the termination of Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, quote, cannot come fast enough. So these are the strongest words the president has said out loud or written out loud, floating the idea of dismissing the Fed chair. A move that's legally questionable, not clear he could fire him if he wanted to. The timing also crucial. It comes just after Powell very publicly warned that the Fed would be in a tough spot as the president's tariffs raise prices and weaken the economy. He says prices likely will go up. It will likely slow down economic growth, and consumers do bear the costs of these tariffs. Let's get right to CNN's Elena Treen at the White House for this much more public front and assault on Jerome Powell. Elena.
That's right. This is really, I think, a breaking point of their relationship, or really hitting a fever pitch, I should say, with what the president is saying this morning. Just to read a little bit of what he wrote. He wrote, quote, Jerome Powell of the Fed, who is always too late and wrong, he said that in all caps, yesterday issued a report which was another and typical complete mess. He went on to say that Powell's termination could not come fast enough. Now, as you mentioned, John, this comes just a day after Jerome Powell spoke in Chicago yesterday and gave his starkest warning yet of the potential economic fallout of President Donald Trump's tariff policies. He said essentially that he believed tariffs would create a, quote, challenging scenario for the central bank and really putting some of their two main goals, which is, of course, having stable inflation and also a healthy labor market at odds. Now, just to give you a step back and give you a little more insight into the relationship between the president and Jerome Powell, it's one that has always been tense and fraught going back years now. And the president has repeatedly, and not just in this term, but also in his first term, urged the Fed to cut rates. But we're seeing that even more so now, of course, because of the economic concerns regarding some of the president's trade policies and tariff policies. Now, one thing that is clear is that the Fed is supposed to operate independently of politics, something Powell reiterated yesterday. But we also know that the president has tried to issue an executive order to take more control over the central bank. And there's also concerns that perhaps the president could move to try and oust Jerome Powell before his term is up in May of 2026. All to say we are seeing this fight really play out more publicly. I would anticipate this isn't the end of what we'll be hearing from the president regarding how Powell is running the Fed.
Yeah.
Let me ask y'all a question before I give my commentary and give you my thoughts. How many people actually agree with the job that Jerome Powell has been doing with the Fed, not just during this second administration of Trump's term, but all throughout Biden's term and previous before that? How many people are satisfied with the Fed? Now, I will tell you that you really can't operate independent of politics because politics directly impact what we as consumers are doing on the ground. You can't operate. I'll give you an example. One of the reasons why the Fed raised rates during the Biden administration was because they were trying to tamp down inflation. Inflation that was directly caused by what was happening policy perspective, opening up our borders, what was happening with the housing crisis, the whole pandemic. And so because of the political spectrum and the things that was happening from the Democrat Party during while Biden was in office, it directly impacted the decision that the Fed was going to make in order to tamp down inflation. I don't know if any of you guys, everybody's saying Powell is a cuck, Powell is trash, he got to go. Some people ride on politics, says he's good with Powell. He has raised rates. Well, Noah's kind. Do you know why he raised rates? I'm not satisfied, says Jay Diggs. I like Anton because he's funny. The reason why they raised rates was because Biden's policies and the things that he was doing was exploding. It exploded when it came to inflation. And so they told you, they said, listen, over the next 3-4 years, it is going to get very, very bad. And basically, they were letting you know that the next administration, whoever it was, whether it was going to be Kamala Harris, whether it was going to be Trump, they were going to have a big job trying to clean up the mess that was that took place over the last 4 years during Biden's term, right? And so they raised rates exponentially in order to lower inflation, which also caused economic pain, which is why everybody said that the cost of living was exploding. It was one of the only tools that they had. Now, remember, in order to keep the economy humming, right, they lowered rates. They lowered rates, and that's what, okay, does everybody understand what raising and lowering rates do on a very basic level? Because I don't want anybody to be missing this. I want to have this conversation in full, and I want to make sure that we all understand exactly what's going on right now. Do you understand why high rates, low rates, the direct correlation to whatever the mortgage rates are, everybody complaining about mortgage rates? And it's okay if everybody don't understand. I can give you the cliff notes, the summaries. The federal, Jody says, fun fact, the Federal Reserve isn't a government agency, it's our central bank. Okay, I'm rolling with that, but here's the problem with that though. The Federal Reserve and our currency used to be backed by something. We actually had real materials that we used to justify the value of the dollar. But then over time, in order to solve for all of the issues that we had, they went and printed more money, which devalued the dollar. And basically, it, in a summary, from a C student's perspective, it made your cost of living go up because your money didn't extend as far. That's why when you see people talking, they say, well, in the 80s or the 70s, a house only cost this, a house only cost that. You have to account for the value of the dollar, inflation over a period of time, right? They say that 2% or lower is actually good over a period of time, but your money doesn't go as long because the value of the dollar itself goes down, because as they continue to print more money and as the cost of living goes up, then that means that your buying power or your purchasing power isn't as strong. So now that's why they say when you go on a job, well, we need the raises that we're getting to keep up with the rate of inflation. Well, if inflation was exploding during the Biden administration, but we never caught up with the cost of living, because you would have to have some form of deflation to get it back in line with how much you was getting a raise on your job. If you was only getting a 2% raise, but inflation was at 10%, close to 10% during the Biden administration, that means what? That your buying power, your purchasing power went down. And then obviously we have to take into account our own individual lives. If you have debt, you got credit card debt, if you have interest rates, if you was buying a house after this whole raising of the rates, then the cost of doing business for you, which is basically the cost of borrowing money, went up. A lot of y'all got Afterpay, Klarna. A lot of y'all got debt. You went and financed some more cars. You went and did some stuff that you wasn't supposed to do. You took out some personal loans. Your personal cost of living went higher, right? And it also depended on where you lived in the country. The people over there in California that's getting overly taxed, they are catching it the worst. The people that's living over in the Midwest or the South, they have it a little bit better. If you head over to New York, it was a lot worse because the cost of doing business and living over there is exponentially high. So basically, when money is cheap, when interest rates goes down, that means that money is flowing throughout the economy because people want to borrow money to do business. When it's cheaper to do business, because the value of doing that business, if it costs me on a basic level, if a lot of people won't sell their homes because, or a lot of people won't buy homes because the interest rates are significantly higher. If you have a mortgage, a fixed rate mortgage at around 3%, you don't want to sell your home even though you've outgrown the home or you want to move somewhere else, because you know you still have to finance another home. Now, if you was purchasing another home cash with the difference in equity that you have on your property, that is what a lot of people in California did. That's why Californians move over to Texas, because it was much cheaper in Texas. Then they had to deal with the property taxes, which is something that we're going to talk about later on in the show. But their homes, the value of their homes, because the cost of living in California exploded. So all of the people that bought homes a long time ago, they sold their homes, especially considering that California was putting in a tax for people that the homes were valued above a certain amount. So people was trying to hurry up and get their homes sold. And then other people were trying to buy the homes at a specific rate because they knew that inflation was out of control when the Fed was warning that there was going to increase interest rates and everybody was working from home. They took the difference in the money and they went and bought homes cash over in Texas, and then they put that as a part of their retirement account. But what about the people that were stuck because they want to move, but they don't want a 6% interest rate because they already around 3%? So then they don't put their house on the market. Meanwhile, you still complaining about the cost of eggs, the cost of gas, the cost of living, the cost of having a credit card and trying to pay off the debt, interest rates, your student loans. Everything is affected because money is not as cheap anymore, which helps to tamp down inflation. But again, our dollar is not valued by anything other than the belief that we have in it and comparing it against other currencies, and also everybody else across the world using a dollar as a reserve currency. And that's how we start to figure out, hey, is he doing a good job? Is he not doing a good job? How is it integrated with politics? The tariffs is going on. The cost of living is going up. Well, people want lower interest rates so we can stimulate the economy and money is cheaper. That's how it ultimately works in our economy. So in a sense, they're saying, hey, listen, this is supposed to operate independent of politics. But that's impossible because everything we do is integrated with politics. That's why it's so important for you to vote.
It does not seem the president liked what Jerome Powell had to say yesterday. The president of the United States went directly after Fed Chair Jerome Powell, saying his termination cannot come fast enough.
A lot of people over in California are actually moving over to Las Vegas as their main residence, and they're keeping their residence, their temporary housing over in California. You know why they're doing that? Because there's no state taxes over in Las Vegas. And the cost of property is significantly cheaper than what they used to. And so it's a quick flight or a quick drive from Los Angeles over to Las Vegas. And so a lot of people are basically moving from California to Vegas to try to keep some semblance of normalcy as far as the weather and proximity to the place that they used to stand in, because they don't want to give up that Cali weather.
Our question to you this morning is a simple legal one, although I'm not sure there's a simple legal answer.
Is there ever?
Can the president terminate the Fed chair?
Well, the simple legal answer, John, is we don't know.
Good job,
sure.
Wonder.
If you look at the state of law as it exists at this moment here, as we sit in April 2025, the answer is no. And that's because of a U.S. Supreme Court case that goes back to 1935 called Humphreys Executive, which says in these multi-member agencies, these independent agencies like the FTC, the SEC, and here the Fed, the president can only remove those members for cause, meaning if
Arizona and Vegas is significantly better than the prices over in California.
the person has done a horrible job, has been absent, that kind of thing. And so that would protect the Fed chair. However, there has been a growing movement by this administration and by prior administrations to challenge that law and to say that essentially, no, it's up to the president if he wants to fire these people, and there's no limitations on why he could fire them. And John, really important to note, if
Send it to
the
me,
president
Pat.
does fire Chairman Powell, there will be
Shout
a
out
lawsuit.
to everybody
Obviously,
over there.
the
I
stakes will be
appreciate
very
y'all for
high,
rocking out with me.
but that may not be the case that decides this, because there's another case involving the firing of other board members of other boards of the FTC and the National Merit Protection Board that's already up at the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has not decided yet whether they'll take it, but that one's way ahead of this potential case in terms of the procedure here. But the stakes here are huge. I think it's only a matter of time before one of these cases reaches the Supreme Court, and that'll tell us exactly how much power the president has to fire the Fed chair and other independent appointees within the executive branch.
I mean, I feel like we have to use Boasberg's words against you when it comes to saying that it hasn't been legally tested. I'm going to say none of their responses has been satisfactory. That is not a satisfactory response, Ellie. We need it to be cut and dry. Yes or no?
I wish I could give you a yes or no, Kate. It would be irresponsible for me. What I will say is, right now, the answer is no, we can't fire him, but that could change. How about that?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if I was Jerome Powell, if I would want to stay in that with all of the pressure that Trump is putting on him. And I think that that's the thing that Trump is doing, is that he's putting more pressure on him by saying it out loud that he doesn't like him. He was saying it when he first got into office. He said it before he got into office that he wasn't rocking with Jerome Powell. So I'll stay on top of this, and I'll keep you guys informed on what's going on as far as what's happening with the Fed. I do think that he should be dropping interest rates. And he's moving a little bit slow to do that because inflation is down. Inflation is down significantly. I believe inflation is at 2.4%. He should be dropping interest rates if inflation is down. You raise rates as a tool against inflation going up. And so if the inflation or the interest rates are supposed to be going down as a result of low inflation, then that means that money would be easier to borrow, and then people can be able to move around a little bit more effectively, and you'll have more money flowing inside of the United States of America. But that's just me personally. Make sure you hit a like for the algorithm, subscribe to the channel, and turn on your notifications. Let me read some of these super chats, and then we're going to continue to get on with the show. I'm glad that we're having fun at the same time debating and learning things that's meaningful.